All right, Shevuos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tilson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar Haba Leinu L'Tova Shmuel Rabin Karapkin, in creation of the yard site of Shmuel's father, Leonard Krapin, Lipa Ben Yecheskel HaKohen Zichron L'Brach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the family Zein Nechama, all of those who need a refuah Shevan Kedol Kol Cholei Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shem Eretz Hashem, bring home our hostages, B'Shalom and B'Karav, and our holy soldiers should be successful B'Chol Ma'asei Yedehem. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Great daf ahead of us. Today's daf is Yud Daled 14. We are picking up Emir Hashem on Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Sorry. Okay, we are picking up Yud Gimel Amud Beis, and we left off actually Umani Rabbi Yehudahi, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So again, at this point, Rabbi Shimon is not disagreeing, right? But Rabbi Shimon is saying like this. Rabbi Shimon is highlighting the following idea. He's saying in the same way that when it comes to Tumas Mikdash Vikadashav, ultimately, there's two different mechanisms of kapara, right? Let's go back for just a second. We'll say, what's Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav? I enter into the base of Mikdash in a state of Tumah without realizing it, right? Or I go ahead and I consume Kodesh in a state of Tumah without realizing it. How do you achieve kapara for that? How do you achieve kapara for that? It depends. What does it depend on? Who you are. If you're a Kohen, you're going to be atoned for that through the power of Yom Kippur. If you are Yisrael, you're going to be atoned for that through the blood application of the inner seir, the inner goat. So Rabbi Shimon says, just like when it comes to Tumah, there's a different kapara mechanism for a Yisrael and for a Kohen, so too, I'm sorry. Kishim shed damasir nasa b'fnim mechapra al Yisrael tumas midrash v'kadashav. Kach tamapar mechapra al kohen al tumas midrash v'kadashav. Ukishim sheviduyav shel sir mishtalech mechapra al Yisrael b'shar averos. And the same way that the confession for the sir mishtalech, which is the goat that is sent out to the wilderness, in the same way that that confession atones for Klal Yisrael for all general averos, so too, kach. Viduyav shalpar mechaper ala kohanim b'shar averos. So too, the confession over the par will take care of all other averos for the kohanim. So I will say, so look what's happened over here. This is really quite fascinating. So a fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon about the framework of kapara for Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Shimon is saying is like this. In the same way that kapara for Tumah is fundamentally different for Kohanim and Yisraelim, Rabbi Shimon says, therefore, the framework for kapara for all Averos is going to be different for Kohanim and Yisraelim. So what is that? So let's go through this. So in Rabbi Shimon's model, so for Tumah, Yisraelim are atoned through the inner seir and Kohanim through the par. So too for Shar Averos, Yisraelim are atoned for through the vidui, through the confession of the Sir HaMishtaleach, and ultimately Kohanim are atoned for through the confession on the par. That's Rabbi Shimon's model. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon, interestingly enough, Kohanim and Yisraelim have two different avenues of kapara on Yom Kippur for everything. Now again, let's go back. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says the only distinction between Kohanim and Yisraelim is in the realm of Tumah, right? Again, and everybody's agreeing on the Tumah piece, right? That Kohanim will be atoned for through the par and Yisraelim through the inner seir. But for all other Averos, according to Rabbi Yehuda, everyone, Kohanim and Yisraelim are atoned for through the Sir Mishtaleach. Okay, so fundamental machlokes in the framework of kapara. Incredible. Or Rabbi Shimon, havadai hushvu, my hushvu. So Rabbi Shimon, here's the issue. The pasuk that we just quoted clearly creates a commonality in kapara, right? Creates a certain common theme, a common thread for kapara. It seems to unite all of Klal Yisrael in a kapara process. But according to you, Rabbi Shimon, there's two distinct avenues of kapara that are unfolding like in a parallel sense for Kohanim and for Yisraelim. So what's going on over here? Well, the Gemara says, my hushvu, so how is there a commonality? The b'nei kapara ninu, the Gemara says, mihu, kol chad v'chad mechaper b'nafshayu. So Rabbi Shimon will say like this. What the pasuk is saying is as follows. There's kapara for everyone, which is actually a beautiful thing, right? There is kapara for everyone. So whether you're a Kohen, a Levi, a Yisrael, whatever you are, there is kapara for you. That's the commonality in the kapara experience. But that's where the commonality ends. What happens after that? Everyone has their own avenue of kapara. Incredible. So the Gemara says, so that's the machlokes. So the Gemara says, my taimei to Rabbi Shimon. So what's Rabbi Shimon's logic? Right? So again, I will say, essentially what it really comes down to is like this. Let's start with what everybody agrees with. What does everybody agree with? Tumah. Everyone agrees that the mechanism for Tumah Kapara is the same, right? In other words, I shouldn't say the same. Everyone agrees on the mechanism. Yisraelim are atoned for through the inner seir, and Kohanim through the par. These are both offerings of Yom Kippur. Okay, so wherein lies the machlokes? The machlokes is really about the seir la'azazel. In Rabbi Yehuda's model, everyone is atoned for in the seir la'azazel for all averos. In Rabbi Shimon's model, Yisraelim are atoned through the seir, and Kohanim are atoned for through the par, specifically the vidui of the par. Okay, so the Gemara says, my time is Rabbi Shimon. So specifically, why is it that Rabbi Shimon holds that the seir is not mechaper for kohanim. Tichsiv v'lokach eshni asirim. So the Gemara says v'lokach eshni asirim. So the pasuk says you shall take the two goats. So remember again, this is the remember what are the two goats? What is the sir nasa bifnim, right? What we call the sir lahashem. That's going to be offered up as a karban, and the other is the sir lazazel, going to be pushed off the cliff. So the Gemara says iskish sir mishtaleach the sir nasa bifnim. So the Torah equates the two sirim. Torah equates the two goats. The goat that is pushed off the cliff, and the goat that is done on the inside, the sir Hashem. Masir hanasa bifnim. So just like the inner seir is not mechaper for kohanim. Remember again, Abosai, everyone's agreeing. What is the inner seir doing? What is it doing? It's for tumas mikdash v'kadashav, for Yisraelim. For Yisraelim. So just like the inner seir doesn't help kohanim, so the Gemara says it right. It's not mechaper for kohanim. It's v'kadashav d'chsibei asher la'am, because the pasuk says specifically that inner seir is for the Am. Who is the Am in this context? The Am in this context is Yisraelim. So to Af Seir, Hamishtalech Eino Mechaper Ala Kohanim B'Shar Averos. So again, so Rabbi Shimon will say, so too the outer seir, meaning the Seir Mishtaleach, is not mechaper for kohanim as well. So essentially, we'll say this is fascinating. So what Rabbi Shimon's model is really predicated on is like this: the Torah itself creates equality between the seirim. Between the Sirim, what does that equality mean? Essentially, the same way that the Sir Naseh Bifnim, the inner Sir, the Sir LaHashem, is not mechaper on Kohanim, because it's only mechaper for the Tumah, for Yisraelim, so to the Sir Mishtaleach is not mechaper for Kohanim as well. It's only mechaper for the Averos of Yisraelim. That's Rabbi Shimon's logic. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda. So what does Rabbi Yehuda, now again, I will say, so what does Rabbi Yehuda do with this comparison between the two serim? What does he do with that? Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Lacha, Lahachi Iskish. I'll tell you why the two serim are compared. Sheyehu Shavim B'mara, Uvekoma, Uvedamim Huda Asa. The pasuk is coming to create an equality between the serim, saying that they have to be the same in their appearance, in their height, and in their value. That's what it means. But it does not mean that they are the same in terms of their ability to affect kapara. So I will say it's a really fascinating fundamental machlokes. And again, I will say what's really incredible about this is, here's the beauty. What's the beauty of this machlokes? Or I should say the good news, everyone is getting kapara. Don't worry, don't lose any sleep. Everyone is getting kapara. The machlokes is on the delivery mechanism of that kapara. So once again, I say, just get this clear. So Rabbi Yehuda himself is holding the Sir Mishtaleach atones for everyone for all averos. Everyone for all averos. So where is the distinction? According to Rabbi Yehuda, the distinction is only in one limited area, namely Tumah. Tumah for Yisraelim, they're going to be atoned for through the inner seir. For Kohanim, they're going to be atoned for through the par. Rabbi Shimon essentially says no. The same way that Kohanim, Leviim, same way that Kohanim are distinct from Yisrael for Tumah, so too Rabbi Shimon just says they're distinct for everything. Distinct for everything. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, they're not included in the Sir Mishtaleach. Rather, they get their kapara for Shar Averos from the vidui on the par. Incredible. So he says, Man Tanaluhu, Ditan Rabbanon, so is the author of the following idea, V'shachat asir achatas asher la'am. So the pasuk says, the Kohen will shecht the seir chatos that is for the nation. This is the inner seir now. The inner seir. She'ena kohanim is kaprimbo. Kohanim do not achieve kapara through this seir. So the Gemara says, Ubamam is kaprin. So how do they achieve kapara? Now, both say specifically what kind of kapara we're talking about. Rabbi Pashto says kapara for tumah. So the Gemara says, Beparo shel Aaron. They get atonement through the par of Aaron. Okay. So the Gemara says, Yachol lo yiskatru beparo shel Aaron. You might have thought that Kohanim, other Kohanim, cannot get kapara through the par of Aaron. After all, Shari Kvar Nemar, because the pasuk already says, Asher lo. So interestingly enough, when it comes to the par of Aaron, what does the pasuk say? Asher lo. What does Asher lo mean? What does Asher lo mean? It's his. So I might have thought that literally, again, the par of Aaron only works for Aaron. Only works for Aaron. To which the Gemara says, Me'ata Asher lo, Me'ata Elan kapara. But if that's the case, So if Kohanim don't get kapara through the seir hana'asa bifnim, the inner seir, and they don't get kapara through the power of Aaron, so then we have a problem. What's the problem? Where do Kohanim get kapara from? So the Gemara says, Kishu Omer, Yichaper ala Kohanim, when the Pasuk ultimately says, speaking about the power of Aaron, Yichaper ala Kohanim, Masina lahen kapara, right? I'm sorry, I should say that, I should get in that, I can have myself. When the Pasuk says, Yichaper ala Kohanim, the Pasuk says that there is kapara for the Kohanim, so Masina lahen kapara. We see that Kohanim do get kapara. What do they get kapara from? B'mahim iskaprim, mutav sheis kapru b'parashal Aaron, shari husra michlalo eitzal beso. It makes more sense that Kohanim will get kapara through the power of Aaron. Why? Because Rabbi say, interestingly enough, as much as the Torah calls the power of Aaron asher lo, that's his, the Torah also makes an exception to that, that's his. What's the exception? His family. So Aaron's family is included. So it makes sense to say that once Aaron's family is included in the par, so too what? So too other Kohanim should be included in the par as well. But Kohanim will not be included in the inner seir where no exception was made for any member of the Kohanic family. First wide line, and if you would like to say, Harehu Omer, Beis Aaron Baruch es Hashem, Beis Halevi Baruch es Hashem, Yirei Hashem Baruch es Hashem. And if you want another proof to this, look at this passage. I will say it's not immediately clear what that proof is. The Gemara is going to explain the brisa now, and everything will become clear. So the Gemara says, Mantana, who's the author of this brisa we just quoted? Rabbi Yirmiyah, Delok Rabbi Huda. It's not Rabbi Huda. Why not? Because Rabbi say, what did the brisa say? The brisa said that Kohanim are not atoned for through the Sir Mishtaleach. Now, if it was Rabbi Huda, the Rabbi Huda, Ha'amar Kohanim, Yeshlan Kapara B'Siyar Mishtaleach. Ultimately, again, Rabbi Huda holds that even Kohanim are atoned for through the Siyar HaMishtaleach. The Gemara says, Ummani, so whose opinion is it? Rava Amar, Rabbi Shimon, it must be Rabbi Shimon, Damar Kohanim, Eilan Kapara B'Siyar Mishtaleach. Because again, Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that Kohanim do not achieve atonement through the Sir Mishtaleach. Rather, again, according to Rabbi Shimon, Kohanim achieve atonement ultimately through what? Through the vidui on the par. Abaye says not necessarily. I feel Tim Rabbi Huda. The Bryce could even be Rabbi Huda. How so? It means to say me'ata. You might have thought that when you look at Kohanim have no mechanism for tara, no mechanism for kapara, for tumas mikdash v'kadashav. Kishu omer yechaper ala Kohanim, when the pasuk says Kohanim will achieve atonement, matzinu sheyish lahen kapara b'shar averos. We do find that Kohanim will have kapara for other averos. We'll say last line, Yud Gimel Amud Beis, ukimod matzinu sheyish lahen kapara b'shar averos, and the same way that Kohanim have kapara for other averos, kach yeshlan kapara top of Yudalid bitumas mikdash v'kadashav. So therefore, again, in the same way that the Torah tells us, and like we'll say, Torah doesn't tell us how, but explicitly how, but the Torah does tell us that Kohanim achieve kapara for shar averos. So the same way that the Kohanim are going to get kapara for shar averos, they also should what? Get kapara for tumas mikdash v'kadashav. Top of Yudalid 14a, first end of the first line. B'mehem iskaprim. But how do Kohanim achieve kapara? Mutav sheyiskapru b'paro shel Aaron. It makes sense that at least for Tumah, they should be covered under the par of Aaron. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, there is already an exception. Even though again the Torah calls the par of Aaron asher lo, which makes it like it's only for him, but it also includes his family. Once it includes his family, it makes sense to what? Also include other Kohanim. Incredible. So it makes more sense to include them in the par of Aaron, where there's already an allowance for his family, as opposed to the inner seir, where there is no allowance for other Kohanim. Rather, again, it's clearly made to function for Yisraelim. And if you'd like to say, Harehu Omar, in addition to that, you could also say, Beis Aaron Baruch es Hashem, my imnaf Omar. What exactly is the Gemara doing by bringing that pasuk? I'll tell you why. You'll say, but how can you do that? The pasuk explicitly says that the par is only works for who? For Aaron ubeso, which sounds like what? His immediate family. So how can you include the rest, Gans Kohanim, how can you include the rest of Kohanim in the family of Aaron? What's the answer? The Gemara says, Kulon Kruyin Beso. All Kohanim are called the family of Aaron. Where do we know that from? Shneemar Beis Aaron Baruch Es Hashem. Who's Beis Aaron? Who's Beis Aaron? Gans Kohanim, right? All Kohanim. And therefore, what do you see from here? When the Torah makes an allowance, ultimately, again, for the family of Aaron to achieve atonement through the par, who is included in the family of Aaron? The entire kahuna. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Shneimar Beis Aaron Baruch Es Hashem, Yirei Hashem Baruch Es Hashem. Incredible. So the Gemara says, V'hai Asher La'am La'ach Asa. But one second, is that phrase Asher La'am? Now the Gemara wanted to suggest beforehand that the pasuk by the Siyar Nasa Befnim, the pasuk by the inner seer says Asher La'am. Asher La'am, the Gemara interprets to mean it only works for atonement for Yisraelim, but not for Kohanim. Interesting, it's coming to exclude Kohanim. It's a very interesting drasha, by the way, because generally, the way these types of drashas work are generally Yisraelim are excluded from Kohanim. Here it's fascinating to see a drasha where Kohanim are excluded from Yisraelim, and Kohanim are excluded from that phrase called Am, which is fascinating in and of itself. That is, I just want to point out something incredible, that as much as there is Kedushas Kahuna, there's something better than Kedushas Kahuna. I'm sorry, Kohanim. Right? You know what's better than Kedushas Kahuna? Kedushas Am. Kedushas Am is the most powerful. Now again, it doesn't mean Kohanim aren't part of Kedushas Am, but there is something ultimately, again, to the Kedusha of the masses that the Kohanim don't have, and there's something powerful about the Kedusha of the Kahuna that the masses don't have. Everyone has their own unique Kedusha. Incredible. So the Gemara goes back to Asher La'am, so the Gemara says, V'hai Asher La'am La'ach Yudasa. But one second, is that what that phrase comes for? Is that phrase used to teach us that Kohanim are excluded from the Siyar Nasa Befnim? So Gemara says, Hami B'Relev D'Kam Rachmana Mida'am Lehavi. That pasuk is answering for something else. That the money for the Siyar Nasa Befnim has to come from the communal coffers. In other words, Rabbi say, if I come along and I say, you know what? Truth is, I would take this opportunity. Imagine somebody said to you, there's a dedication opportunity open, right? Dedication opportunity to dedicate and to sponsor the Sir HaNa'aseh B'fnim of Yom Kippur. I would say, who would not take that opportunity, right? So again, the Gemara says, sorry, not open, taken. It's got to come from communal funds, which I would say is fascinating in and of itself. Now, why does it have to come from communal funds? Because it's a communal offering. Communal offerings cannot be privately sponsored. Communal offerings must come from communal, which I will say is also a fascinating yesod. There's a place, I should say, there's a lot of places for private donations, right? But then there are certain things that have to come from the tzibur, certain things that all of us need to get involved in and cannot be carried by any one individual. So the Gemara says, mida'am, when it says that the carbon comes from the am, that means that the carbon has to come from communal funds. That's what it's teaching us, not to exclude Kohanim. Hami Baile, to come Rachmana mida'am lehavi. How the Gemara says, the Gemara says, no, that's learned out from a different source. So the Gemara says, no, we learn out the fact that it has to come from communal funds from that phrase of me'es adas b'nei Yisrael, that the carbon has to come from adas b'nei Yisrael. I v'hai asher lo lahach Yehuda asa. Rabbi say, does that phrase asher lo come to teach me that halacha l'maisa only the Kohen, right? Only the Kohen achieves kapara through his par? So Gemara says, "Hi mi boile, we need that ashalo for something else." Chedesanya mishalohu mevi ve'ino mevi mishal sibor. I will say this is interesting. In the same way that the sir na'aseh b'fnim, the inner seer of Yom Kippur, has to come from communal funds, cannot be privately sponsored. The par of the Kohen Gadol must come from his own money and cannot come from communal funds. So the Gemara says, "Yachol lo yavi mishal tzibor shenat sir miskabrim bo." Now you might have thought, okay, so the Kohen Gadol, he can't bring his power from communal funds. You know why? Because the power of the Kohen Gadol does not affect communal tara, does not affect communal kapara. But I might have thought that perhaps he could make a collection amongst his fellow Kohanim and go ahead and bring the par from that money, since Kohanim do get kapara from it. Talmud lomar asher lo. Therefore, the pasuk says no. Even though, as we've established, that the par will atone for other Kohanim, it must be paid for by the Kohen Gadol himself. Yachol lo yavi v'imhevi kasher. So you might have thought, okay, ideally, the Kohen Gadol should not bring a par that is not paid for by his own money. But if he brought that kind of par, it should still be kosher. Talmud lomar shuv asher lo. So therefore, the pasuk says a second time that the par has to belong to the Kohen Gadol, saying shana alav akasav la'akev. We'll say sometimes in the Torah says something twice. Is to teach you what? That it's li'ikuva, that you have to have, that this is an indispensable piece of information. And therefore, again, it's not just that the par should be bought with the Kohen Gadol's money, but if it's not, it's okay anyway. No, it's got to be bought with this money, and if it's not, the par itself is going to be puzzle. So the Gemara says, Tana hachi kakashile. This is what the Tana was bothered by. Maishna bid'am delo mechaper. The Gemara says, why is it that ultimately, again, why is it that ultimately the am is not why mashna b'da'am delo mechaper? Why is it that halacha l'maisa that the am is not included in the kapara? The Gemara says delo kachasri be mamone dichsiv asher la'am. So ultimately, again, I will say this is incredible. You cannot achieve kapara in something you did not spend money on. Isn't that incredible? You cannot achieve kapara with something you did not spend money on. Kapara requires sacrifice. If you're not willing to give up something, kapara is not achievable. I will say, we see this concept in many different ways. Sometimes what stands in our way of becoming true Bali Tshuva? Let's be honest, right? It's too early not to be honest, right? What stands in our way of not becoming true Bali Tshuva is we're really not willing to give up certain things, and we're not willing to stop doing certain things that stand in our way. In other words, I have a sincere desire to be a better person, and I have a sincere desire to change my life. I'm just unwilling to let go of certain things that are holding me back. Chazal have a term for this. What is it called? It's called tovel v'sheretz biyado. Right? So all of us have our shrutzim in life that we hold on to. Right? It's the things that I know are not good, they're not healthy, they're not helpful, they're toxic, maybe they're sinful, or maybe they're just detrimental, right? And I know it. But here I am, right? I'm strutting off to the mikvah, right? Doing my thing, ready to achieve tara, and I'm dunking and dunking and dunking. And again, the mikvah represents all the beautiful things that I'm doing in life, and it's all incredible. And then I'm wondering, but I'm doing all this great stuff, but why am I not getting traction? And it's very simple. Look what you're holding on to. Look what I'm holding on to. I'm holding on to all of those shrutzim. As long as you hold on to the sherets, you could go into the most beautiful mikvah. You could engage in all the most positive and beautiful dynamic activity in life. It'll help, but you're not going to get anywhere. I don't get anywhere in life until I let go of my shrutzim. True kapara requires sacrifice. True kapara requires excising certain things from my being so I can move myself forward. The Gemara says, do you know how I know that Yisraelim are not included in the kapara of the par? Do you know how I know that? Because it didn't cost them anything. And if it doesn't cost you anything, you're not getting kapara. Kapara requires sacrifice. Purity requires sacrifice. Growth requires sacrifice. Whether it's sacrifice of my money, sacrifice of my time, or sacrifice of the shrutzim, the stuff that I've been holding on to for a very long time that is actively holding me back. And again, we'll say the reality is, most of us go through life and we never let go of our shrutzim. Now, the good news is, even if you, kind of good news, even if you never let go of your shrutzim, could you accomplish great stuff in life? Can you accomplish? Yeah, you absolutely can. But you never fully self-actualize. You never fully become the best version of you because I'm refusing to let go of the stuff that at the end of the, you know what it's like? It's like, you ever get a stain on your shirt, right underneath the area where you wear your tie, right? It only happens to me. I guess I might be the only person left who wears ties, right? That might be it. Okay, got it. Right. So the nice, you know what's interesting about it is you have to walk around fully self-conscious all the time, right? Because as long as my tie lies straight, I'm good to go. But if like I turn a little too quickly or something else, like it's right there. It's right there. To me, it's often become a tremendous metaphor for life. Instead, what could I do? I could change my shirt, right? I could actually, but you know what? But I've been wearing it for 4 days already. You know, I'm kind of like, you know, we're good. Like we've kind of grown accustomed to one another. You know, everything is nice. Everything is fine. So it's okay as long as the tie remains perfectly centered. We're good to go. We're good to go. And I will say it's a tremendous metaphor in life. Instead, like just put on a clean shirt. Just put on a clean shirt, and life is so much easier. You don't have to worry about the positioning of the tie. But I like it. I kind of got used to it. Even kind of like Stain and I, we've become one. You know, so we go through life like that so much that we hold on to those shrutzim and we just never let go. Instead of realizing, and again, I can accomplish and it's great and I look nice and I look fine. Instead of finding the courage to let go of the shrutzim, make the sacrifice. Make the sacrifice. Let go of the stuff and move yourself forward. So the Gemara says, that's how I know there's no kapar for the am. So the Gemara says, B'da'aro nami lo kachasi b'mamona. B'ka'amar Kula and Kruyin base. But 1 second. But that doesn't make any sense. Because you just said before that the Kohanim do achieve kapara through the par, and yet they did not spend any money on it. So what's going on? So the Gemara said because they're included in base. So Bishlam Rabbi Shimon Hainu Dichsev Trevi Duyin. So according to Rabbi Shimon, this makes sense. That's why it says again 2 viduis, right? There's 2 viduis mentioned, also the blood application of the par. Chad kineged sir nasa b'fnim, so one corresponding to the inner seer. V'chad kineged sar nasa b'chutz, and one corresponding to the outer seer. Don't let the liable one achieve atonement. Don't let the liable one achieve atonement for the one who is liable. In other words, it was like the Kohen Gadol is the architect for kapara for everyone, for himself, for his fellow Kohanim, and for Gans Klal Yisrael. Therefore, it only makes sense that the architect of kapara, or say the quarterback, not the architect, Hakadosh Baruch Hu is the architect, the quarterback of kapara should first what? Achieve his own level of kapara, and then be the quarterback for everyone else. Because if the Kohen Gadol himself is not tahor, how is he going ahead? And if he doesn't have kapara, how is he achieving that on behalf of everyone else? Which also in and of itself is a beautiful Musar HaSkil, that if you want to accomplish things on behalf of other people, first make sure your own house is in order. You want to raise inspired children, make sure that you're an inspired individual. You want to go ahead and encourage others to become the best version of themselves, make sure you're living your best life. So we'll say ultimately, again, that's what happens. Okay, so now we have a ton of information over here. So first of all, like, how do we paskin? And there's a number of different things going on over here. Number one, in this model, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, how are we passing? Specifically, Rabbi, so what this comes down to is as follows. That what's the point of contention? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, Seir HaMishtaleach LaAzazel, right? The seir that's sent over the cliff. Does that only atone for Yisraelim? That is Rabbi Shimon's model. Only Yisraelim, not Kohanim. Kohanim get their kapara through the par. Or is it mechaper for everyone? Everyone, that's Rabbi Yehuda. Because remember again, when it comes to Tumah, everyone is agreeing on the kapara framework. For Tumah, Yisraelim are atoned for through the inner seer, and Kohanim are atoned for through the par. The shaila is, what does the seer do? So I will say, here it is, the much-awaited, long-anticipated Rambam, Sir Mishtaleach. So I'll say, see here, first of all, the Rambam says when it comes to Sir Mishtaleach, the Rambam writes, Sir Mishtaleach, the Fishu kapara, the Kol Yisrael, Kohen Gadol misvad alav aloshon kol Yisrael shneimar misvad alav es kol avonos bnei Yisrael. Sir Mishtaleach mechaper al kol averos sheba Torah. The seer goes ahead and atones for everything, all the averos. The Gemara says hakalos v'chamuros, intense averos, less intense averos, zodon, shogig, knew about it, didn't know about it. Everything is atoned for through tshuva. That was not only that the Rambam says it atones for everyone. So we paskin at the end of the day like Rabbi Yehuda. The Sir Mishtaleach atones for everyone, for all averos. However, the Rambam adds in a very important caveat. What's the important caveat? V'hu sha'asa tshuva. V'hu she'asa tshuva. So I'm sorry, you can't sleep through Yom Kippur. Right? So this goes back to yesterday's daf. Machlokes Rebbe and the Rabbanon. Right? How does Yom Kippur work? Remember again, Rebbe said, Itzumo shel Yom Mechaper. The essence of the day atones. According to Rebbe, even if you don't daven, even if you're right, it was even better, according to Rebbe, right? Even if what? Even if you eat on Yom Kippur, right? Even if you do malach on Yom Kippur, the day itself atones for you. The Rabbanan say, yes, the day atones for you, but you need to unlock the atonement power of the day through what? Through tshuva. The Rambam paskins like the Rabbanon. Right? The halacha l'maaseh Yom Kippur is the most powerful day in the world, but the power of the day must be unlocked through tshuva. Now, both say, you say to yourself, something like you say, oh, I was kind of hoping like for the other way about this, right? No, so just understand, this actually works in our favor. This works in our favor. Why does it work in our favor? Because the Rambam says in the next halacha, Bizman shein beis hamikdash kayim, ve'ein lanu mizbeach kapara. So remember again, now that unfortunately there is no beis hamikdash, and now that there is no altar upon which to achieve kapara, ein sham ela tshuva, hatshuva michaperes al kol averos. So remember again, Abosai, as beautiful as it was to read Rebbe's position, that ultimately, again, it's sumo shel yom mechaper, that the day itself atones, or even according to Rebbe, that atonement was unlocked through the seir, through the Seir Mishtaleach, which means, as beautiful as Rebbe's model is, it's fantastic when the Beis HaMikdash stood. But if the Beis HaMikdash is not standing, then what do we do? The beauty that we have, Rabbi Osai, is even in the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, the Rambam says, we have something more powerful than the Beis HaMikdash. Can you imagine saying that? We have said each of us possesses something more powerful than the Beis HaMikdash. We possess something more powerful than the Mizbeach. We possess something more powerful than the Seir HaAzazel. What is that called? Tshuva. The most powerful force in the entire universe is the power of tshuva. And about like the Gemara said yesterday, and when can you access that most powerful force in the world? Any time you want. The Seir L'Azazel could only be mechaper once a year on Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol could only go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim once a year. But you and I could access the most powerful force in the universe, namely tshuva, when? Each and every moment. Incredible. All right, Rabbi, that's the halacha. Mazel tov on our first parak of Masechah Shevuos. What a ride. What a ride. Incredible. Okay, it's only going to get better. Let's go. Yediyas HaTumah. Shtayin Shein Arba. So we'll say, so now actually this is a repeat. Of the first Mishnah. So we're back to Tumah. I know you thought we were done with Tumah. We are not. More Tumah to come. Tumah everywhere. So the Gemara says as follows: Yedios HaTumah Shtayim Shein Arba. So remember again, we saw this already before. There are two biblical cases that are really four. Now again, what are they? Now we're experts in this already. What are the two biblical cases? Two biblical cases are: I forgot that I was tamei, but I remember. So again, two cases, right? I became tamei. I forgot. I entered into the Beis HaMikdash. I remembered afterwards that I was tamei. I became tamei. I knew that. I forgot. I ate kodesh, and then I remembered afterwards that I was tamei. Okay, so those are the two biblical cases. So what we call helam tumah. I forgot that I was tamei. Yields two more cases. What are the two more cases? I remember that I was tamei, but what? I forgot that I entered into the Beis HaMikdash. Or I remember that I was tamei, but I forgot that what I'm eating is kodesh. Right? So those are the two additional cases. So those are the two that ultimately again become four. So the Mishnah now just elaborates on it. Nitma v'yada. So again, I became tamei. I knew that I was tamei. V'ne'alma mimeno, and then I forgot. V'ne'alma mimeno tumah. V'zachar sakodesh. But I remembered that I was in the Beis HaMikdash. Right? Or I remembered that I right. Or ne'alo mimeno hektish. Or ultimately, again, another case could be that I forgot about the Hekdesh. I remember the Tumah, or I forgot about both of them, and I consumed Kodesh, and I didn't know, and then after I ate the Kodesh, I remembered, Now I will say, so again, the Gemara is not really, the Mishnah is not fully explicitly articulating the cases, it's giving elements of the cases. But again, remember, essentially, any case where there is Yediyah B'tchila, the Yediyah B'sof. So awareness in the beginning, awareness in the end, lapse of awareness in the middle. Now again, there's four different cases of lapses, right? There's two lapses of Tumah awareness. I knew I was Tameh, I forgot, I entered into the Beis HaMikdash, I remembered afterwards. I remembered that I was tamei. I forgot I ate kodesh, remembered afterwards. That's cases 1 and 2, which then give 3 and 4, which are derivative cases. I know that I'm tamei, but I forgot I was in the mikdash, and then I remembered that I was in the mikdash. I knew that I was tamei. I forgot that I'm eating kodesh, and then I remembered that I was eating kodesh. In all of those cases where there's awareness beginning and end, right, lapse in the middle, the liability is for what we call a carbon ola v'yored, which is a carbon as a sin offering that is based on your financial status. Right? If you have money, you'll bring one type of carbon. We'll talk about all of this. And if you're poor, all the way down to, right? So in other words, the highest level is going to be a behema, and the lowest level is a mincha. A mincha. That's the range. So nitma. The person became tamei, and he knew, right? Then he forgot. But he remembered that he was in the base of mikdash. Mikdash, or he forgot that he was in the mikdash. And he remembered the tuma. Or he forgot about both of these things. And he went into the mikdash and wasn't aware. When he came out of the mikdash, he became aware again. Again, so we'll say same common denominator. Awareness in the beginning, awareness in the end, and halam and forgetfulness or lapse awareness in the middle results in carbon ola v'yored. Next, echad. So we'll say, so now, interestingly enough, this is actually quite fascinating. We speak about entering into the mikdash in a state of tumah. So now the Gemara is going to discuss what constitutes entering into the mikdash. Echad hanichnas la'azara. So whether you enter into the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, ve'echad nichnas litosefes ha'azara, or let's say you entered into an addition onto Zara. So we're going to discuss the idea now that technically speaking, there are ways to extend the temple compound, right? But there's a process. There's a process. In other words, let's say Klal Yisrael decides, the Sanhedrin decides, we want to expand the Beis HaMikdash. We want to expand the footprint of the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, how do you add on to the Beis HaMikdash? So we'll say, so it's not just enough to start building stuff. You remember, you have to add, if you're going to add on, you want the additional area to have the sanctity of the Beis HaMikdash. How does that happen? This is incredible. So the same way, by the way, you could expand Yerushalayim. Isn't that incredible? If you want to expand the borders of Yerushalayim, you can do that. Now again, if I extend Yerushalayim, I don't just want to expand the municipality, I want to expand ultimately, again, the Kedusha. I want the Kedusha of the city to devolve upon the extended areas as well. So in order to do this, the only people who can do this are B'melech, Navi, V'urim, V'tumim, V'sanhedrin, Shal Shivim, V'echad. So again, we'll get into this process, but this is quite incredible. If you want to expand the Kedusha borders of Yerushalayim, you want to expand the Kedusha footprint of the Beis HaMikdash, you can do it. But in order to do it, you need the king, the prophet, the Urim V'tumim, which remember again is the 72-letter name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that goes into the fold, right? It's the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, and a Sanhedrin of 71. Now whether you need all of these people, some of these people, we're going to discuss. Furthermore, ubishnei